The story begins during the day in a tall skyscraper. A man was climbing the stairs and breathing heavily. He was so tired from climbing that he thought he was going to die, wondering why no one had told him that the elevator wasn't working. It was already the 28th floor, and he thought he wouldn't have accepted the job if he had known. At that moment, he called the intercom saying he had a delivery. The woman who opened the door finally spoke, asking how long they could wait. The man looked at her in shock, sweating, and asked what she meant. Furious, she snatched the package from him, saying the restaurant was across the street and she wasn't going to pay for the delivery. As he tried to explain that the elevator wasn't working, she angrily retorted, "Are you kidding me?" She said the food was already cold and she knew it. The delivery had been random lately. Losing his patience, the man furiously shouted, "Then why don't you get your fat ass off the couch and get your own food?" Suddenly he came to his senses, timidly apologized to the woman, telling himself to breathe deeply. If she complained about him, they would revoke his right to take orders for a few days. Wondering what else he had left, he blamed himself for being so poor. Thinking about this, he was sitting on his scooter when he suddenly saw something surprising. Turning his head, he saw something strange. In front of him was an enormous, round, blue substance, a gate. Several years ago, these gates started opening all over the world. These gates lead to dungeons infested with monsters, a threat that couldn't be fought by human efforts alone. Then the gods, called the mythics, chose several representatives of the human race and endowed them with incredible power. These chosen ones took on the responsibility of fighting the monsters and were called hunters by people all over the world. The man thought he was annoyed because it would now take forever to get around this. For simple people like him, all this otherworldly stuff was just an eternal headache. Suddenly, someone called him. When he answered the phone, the person yelled, "Young," and asked what he had said to the customer. The man said he had just received a call from a restaurant saying they had canceled their services in favor of another delivery company, all because he had been rude to the customer. The caller said he already had issues, and Young thought about the restaurant with concern. The person on the phone told him he was now banned from taking orders for a week and asked if he understood. Young said fearfully, "But boss." The caller hung up after sending him a message about the customer's feedback on their service, which included a photo of the food in the bathroom and a note saying he lived across the street from the restaurant. The delivery took over half an hour. The food arrived cold, and all the other snacks were soggy, so he had to dump everything in the bathroom. Angry, Young decided he would now explain everything to his boss. But suddenly he screamed, holding his head in his hands. He realized that he would need to pay rent next week and would have to work as a driver. He wondered why the mythics didn't choose him and give him a gift like those hunters. If he were a hunter, he would now be living luxuriously and comfortably. With these thoughts, he decided to go home when he suddenly heard a sound and wondered in surprise where the sound of a harp was coming from. At that moment, he received a message on his phone informing him that he had a new delivery order. Young looked at the message with surprise and thought, "What is this?" He had never seen an app like this. What kind of notification was this? The notification said he had a new delivery order. Suddenly, a bright pink light began to emanate from the phone, and the light enveloped Young. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them, he found himself in a very strange place. There were pink clouds around him, and in front of him was a huge pink castle with flying unicorns. Young was near the gate, still sitting on his scooter and looking at it in amazement, wondering where he was. Is this a dream? Or was he chosen by the gods? After crying, he thought he could finally get out of the slums and no longer work as a messenger. Suddenly, he received another message saying he had a new delivery order. Picking up the phone, Young saw that a bottle of nectar had been ordered and that a route had been set. He thought in surprise, is this a delivery app? He couldn't understand what kind of nectar it was or what he needed to deliver, but he thought maybe he could accept it. As he clicked accept, a large pink gate opened in front of him, and he rode his scooter through it. Ahead of him was a huge, luxurious pink castle. According to the map, this was the dwelling of the gods. He looked around in surprise, and looking ahead, he thought, wow, should I pick up the order? Knocking on the huge pink gate, he thought that if he met someone from the mythical world, he might have a chance to become a hunter. On the other side of the door, a beautiful girl with long blonde hair and a long dress opened the door for him. The man greeted her, trying to explain why he had come, but the girl exclaimed, "He is a man! What is a mortal doing in Olympus?" She told him to explain himself, asking how he could get here. Hung showed her the phone with the delivery app, saying he wanted to know himself. He had a strange app and placed an order for himself. The girl, thinking, said, "Delivery app?" Immediately she exclaimed, "That idiot Hermes!" She told him to wait a moment because normally people shouldn't touch these things. At that moment, she handed him a vial with something resembling a flame inside, telling him to take it. Apparently, her brother would make a scene if he didn't deliver it on time. She asked him to bring it as quickly as possible and not to even think about opening the cork and drinking it, asking, Okay? The girl told him not to drink a drop. Young, surprised, said okay. The girl gestured to him that she was watching him and abruptly closed the door. Hung was stunned and thought, what is going on? He thought he would no longer be a messenger, but even from the gods, he received suspicions and warnings not to touch their food. Looking at the vial, he thought it looked like just apple juice, wondering if he could simply throw it away. Walking towards the motorcycle, Jung thought that the girl had told him this needed to be delivered to her brother. So he is also a god? He decided that if so, maybe he would agree to become his celestial patron, and placing it, told himself this was the last delivery of his life. Jung drove down a steaming road with visible lava cracks. The app showed he was approaching his goal, and he realized he seemed to be arriving soon. He reached a large house next to the lava. Jung shouted that the delivery had arrived, thinking to himself how many flights he had traveled today. Entering the house, he realized it was very hot, like a sauna, and wondered where the heat came from. At that moment, he saw a man hammering something with a huge hammer next to a large furnace. Turning, the burly man asked who was there. Jung, scared, told him not to think he was some kind of thief and that he had a delivery for him. Jung stepped back in fear as the man approached, holding a huge sword in his hands. Then looking at him, Joyfu told him she must have sent it from his sister. Hearing this, Jung thought in surprise, they are siblings? But they are completely different. Maybe they are not relatives. The man said thoughtfully, looking at Jung, that he was not Hermes, asking him how a mortal got here. The man was shocked and pointed his fiery sword at Jung when suddenly the scared man said he should wait because his sister asked him to deliver this vial as quickly as possible. Taking the vial in his hands, the man asked in surprise, "Did she really give it to you? And you never took a sip?" He replied, well, naturally he is not a petty thief who disobeys others' orders. Looking at the man, he told him to take it quickly. He laughed loudly, holding his stomach, and Jung couldn't understand what was happening. The man said, "Let me look at you, good fellow." He said that a sip of nectar would make him a god. It's hard to believe he didn't feel tempted. Hung was shocked by what he heard. "I guess I'll wait," he said. "Are you saying that this bottle that looks like apple juice can turn him into a god?" Finally, in his hands was something that would help him say goodbye to the life of a delivery man forever. Thinking about this, he looked at the vial, but the man snatched it from Hung's hands, smiling. Hung, surprised, reached out to him. Embarrassed. He wanted to ask for at least a sip, but at that moment the man drank it all. After catching his breath and saying he liked to drink it all at once, he spoke with satisfaction about how he hadn't drunk such fresh nectar in a long time. It seemed that he delivered it without the slightest delay. With these words, the man said he liked him, said his name was Hephaestus. Hung introduced himself in response, and Hephaestus, mispronouncing his name aloud, said it was a very interesting name. Thanking him for his work, he wanted to say that wasn't his name, but Hephaestus interrupted him. He said he had refreshed himself with nectar, and now it was time to get to work. Wishing Jung a good journey, he placed his hand on his shoulder and said, "Wait," after which the man looked back in surprise and looked at Jung. Jung told him, laughing, that he hadn't paid. He decided he wouldn't leave here empty-handed. Hephaestus asked in surprise, "He didn't pay?" He asked if he was referring to the payment for the delivery. Hephaestus said that Jung should have already received it, laughing. At that moment, he remembered the app. Looking at the screen, from which a very strong light was coming, he closed his eyes, and a window appeared in front of him where 1,000 points were written. Lying on the couch and looking at the screen, Jung thought that this definitely wasn't a dream. He was once again enveloped by that dazzling light, and then returned to Earth. That's why he first thought it was a dream. But that warning didn't disappear. Jung looked at the screen and thought, he doesn't even know where to spend these points. Couldn't he pay with money? He was frustrated by the fact that he was so close to the gods and had only achieved this. Wondering if he was asking too much, it cost them nothing to make him the strongest hunter in the world in his category. Thinking about this, Jung suddenly looked at the screen and asked in surprise, "Huh?" He saw a sign that said the points could be exchanged for goods in the store, and Jung asked the store, surprised. After deciding he needed to buy something, he entered the store and saw the goods, thinking, what kind of nonsense is this? The goods included a golden apple, an axe, a lead arrow, a golden arrow, and a moped. Jung thought he didn't need this, and what kind of motorcycle? The moped was the most expensive, and Jung couldn't understand why it was so expensive. There was no equipment for hunters here. Even if he got it, he wouldn't survive a minute in the dungeon. Jung decided it was all in vain, and that he would never become a hunter. At that moment, he saw something incredible and shouted, "What is this?" He saw that the points could be converted into money, and one coin was worth 10,000 in local currency. Jung thought, that's what I was thinking. He touched the screen with his finger, and suddenly a 10,000 bill flew to him. Looking at the screen, he saw he had earned fewer points. Jung was shocked. He couldn't believe this was happening. Pressing the button several times, his apartment filled with money. Then he picked up the money from the floor, squeezing it in his hand, and said madly, this is what he understands as a reward. He couldn't figure out if he was dreaming. Young sat at the table saying happily how delicious it was for him. He found that the conversion to real money really worked. He even checked one of the bills at the ATM and found it was real money. He had 800 points left in his account, which equaled 10 million. He received all of this in a single delivery. The establishment employee asked Young if everything was all right with his dish. He cried while eating, responding to the man that everything was incredibly delicious, and suddenly laughed madly. The worker hurriedly left, and Young was thinking about what he would do with that money. Suddenly, he noticed an advertisement from the best hunter guild in the country, We Onu, announcing the signing of a contract with Aeon Sulin. Aeon looked at the ad again, surprised after reading that with the new member. The guild was preparing for the next raid on Tartarus, one of the most terrible and dangerous dungeons. The celestial patron of Aeon Lin, according to rumors, is the Olympian god Hephaestus. To continue thinking, Young, surprised, thought, Hephaestus, that's his patron? After that, he thought with a smile that he didn't care about that. For him, Hephaestus was the best client in the world. Later, Young left the establishment saying he was full. At that moment, his phone rang, and he thought it must be a new order. When he answered, he had a good feeling. It's good that he went on a moped. Young got on the moped and saw a notification that he had an order for him saying, let's go. The phone's light began to dim again, and Young closed his eyes. Then, opening them, he asked himself where he was. He was in a beautiful and large garden with rainbows and butterflies flying around. Young said in surprise that he was in some kind of garden. He decided to see what he would deliver this time, when he suddenly heard a question behind him. Is it Young? He was very surprised and saw behind him a woman in a long white dress who said she was happy to meet him. Her name is Demeter. Her name is Demeter? Young greeted her, and Demeter said that her nephew had told her that he was a delivery man. After that, Young asked her nephew, surprised, and she replied, yes. His name is Hephaestus. He knows him? Young thought, what a family. It wasn't clear who was with whom. Saying that Hephaestus delivered the nectar very quickly, Demeter said it seemed he was trustworthy, and that she wanted him to deliver something for her. Young told her that she wasn't mistaken, and that he would deliver whatever she wanted because she could trust him. Young thought that if this is something like the last order, then it's easy money. She would probably give him some kind of magic crown. Demeter said that was wonderful and asked him to wait, starting to cast a spell. Green rays began to emanate from her hands, and suddenly a white box tied with a red ribbon appeared. Young looked at it in surprise, and Demeter, she asked if he could take it to her daughter. She said she was sorry she couldn't do it herself, but they, the gods, shouldn't leave their dwellings without a serious reason. With those words, she handed the box to Young, and he thought about delivering the box. He decided it was an easy decision and said, of course, he understood. At that moment, Demeter looked at him with sad eyes, and everything around became dark. The flowers wilted and the sun set. Demeter walked away, and Ong said, surprised, what? Turning around, he couldn't understand what it was because it suddenly got so dark. Did he think something had gone wrong? Suddenly a thought occurred to him. What if this is not a simple lunchbox but a bomb? After that, he thought he really didn't care. The main thing was that they had been paid. Sitting on the scooter, he remembered that she had said it was for her daughter, so there was definitely nothing dangerous in the box. Ong decided to look where he needed to go, and pressing his finger on the screen was suddenly horrified. He started to feel drawn in, and couldn't understand what was happening. After some time, he found himself in the real world, and wondered in amazement why he had returned to Earth. He couldn't understand what had happened to his delivery, but now he is at Noryengjin Station, and needs to get to Sainon Station. He thought it couldn't be possible that Demeter's daughter really lived in South Korea. Ong was surprised to remember that Demeter had told him that the gods shouldn't leave their dwelling without a serious reason, thinking that, after all, she said exactly that. So what was her daughter doing in South Korea? Deciding he would find out in time, Young smiled and thought he had never felt so inspired by a new order. He drove down the road and thought about how much he would be paid this time. He received a message that he was approaching his goal, and suddenly he thought for a minute, this can't be true. He exclaimed that if he had known, he would never have accepted this request. In front of him was a huge purple portal, and Ong thought that her daughter lived in such a dangerous dungeon of the world. No wonder this dungeon is called the Hunter's Grave. Hunters die there. Even worse, Young was sweating with tension. Nobody knows what lies in the depths of that dungeon. He was terribly scared and thought, no, why? He decided she was in the depths of the dungeon. He thought maybe she was waiting for him at the entrance. Suddenly, he received a message updating his destination. A map appeared on his phone, and he thought, why do I have a map in the app as if it's a computer game? He shouted, shocked, that they were making fun of him and that he wasn't going there. deciding he wouldn't be there and was canceling the request. He looked at his phone and exclaimed surprised, "What? Divine punishment?" The phone said there were 42 minutes and 40 seconds left. Divine punishment consists of turning the offender into a pig while keeping his mind. Ong shouted, "What kind of stupid punishment is this?" Tired, looking at the sky, he thought he was done and shouted in condemnation, "Why did I accept this request without even reading it?" After that, he thought, however, how could he have foreseen this? There were several people in black near the portal, and Jung thought about how he could get past the gate guards, since he didn't have a hunter's license. Trying to think, he said, "Doomed by ex-enti." Now Tom, katsu, fried bacon, and pork soup came to mind. At that moment, he received a message on his phone and asked, annoyed, "Well, what?" It was advice that said when he needed help, he could take a look at the shop because he might find items to help him. Jung asked, surprised, "The shop? What if I can't buy anything?" At that moment, he suddenly exclaimed, "Stop! What if I exchanged his points and hired some hunters?" He looked at the shop on his phone and, looking at the first position, asked thoughtfully at the cap,